Hello and welcome to Smart Action Pro webinar. We'll be talking about how you can do development in SharePoint without writing any code using just your browser. Today, when you want to implement business logic in SharePoint, you have several options. You can use SharePoint Designer workflows, declarative workflows without writing any code, but those are limited in functionality and don't really give you all the tools that you need. You can write custom workflows in Visual Studio, but then it requires you to have knowledge and programming experience. It's quite difficult and time-consuming, and you still need to deploy and activate it. Or you can write custom event receivers, but again, you have to be a developer, you have to have experience with development under SharePoint, and you still need to deploy and activate your solution. Now, Smart Action Pro allows you to implement your business logic without writing any code, and it does it through your browser without any tools. In a fraction of time, it usually takes you to develop comparable solutions. So how does Smart Action Pro does it? Smart Action Pro allows you to run actions. There are 15 different types of actions, and we'll cover them in a minute. And these actions will be running according to events, such as items added, deleted, or modified, according to a timer, or manually by clicking on, for example, a ribbon button. You can also execute actions always or according to conditions, such as, for instance, the amount is greater than $1,000. You can even have after change conditions, such as status changed to being completed. So the action will not run before that, and the action will never run after that. You can have actions running and be required, or you can even have actions that are optional, and the users themselves can decide whether or not they want the action to be executed. You also have the option of having before and after actions, and the reason why it's important is that before actions can be even used to prevent the item from being saved when the action, for example, fails or does not execute. You also have built-in logging and error notification capabilities. For instance, you can get an email when action fails. Another important thing is that the actions are saved as a part of the list or site templates. So you can implement your logic, save as a template, and then recreate it and duplicate the logic in more places, saving you time. And the most important, it's 100% browser-based. So you configure and you monitor everything using just your browser within your SharePoint site. So let's see what action types we have here. Updating list items in any list, in any site of the site collection, and even beyond that. Creating new items or documents, creating or deleting items, copying items or documents, sending emails, running workflows, managing permissions on sites, lists, items, and so on, creating new sites and lists, executing stored procedures in external databases of any type, calling into web services, managing Active Directory. You can create users groups and assign users to groups and so on. You can use it to print items and send this printout to someone as a PDF, for instance. You can calculate summaries of multiple items and store this value or use it in your conditions. And you can even run PowerShell scripts. So let's see the demo of Smart Action Pro to see it in action. What we have here is we have a Project Hub site. So basically in this site we'll be creating projects and all the projects will be listed in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new project. Now all we need to add is basically the project's name and the start and end date of the project. So for instance, it's going to be running through the month of August. Now once we've done that, what happens next is all of these actions get executed. You can see here that the actions are placed under the action column, which is used to manage the actions and also to store the results of their execution. Now you can see here that each action has a checkbox that is disabled and checked, placed right next to it. In this case, these actions will always execute. Users have no control over them, but you can also specify that the action can be opted out, so users can remove the check mark, or opted in, so the check mark is unchecked by default and users can choose to execute. Also, you have conditions. For instance, an action can run only when certain conditions apply. So what we're going to do here, we are first going to create a group in our Active Directory, a domain group. Then we're going to be adding the current user to that group. Then we're going to use that group to update a user or group field in the current item in our project. Then we're going to create an entry in an external non-SharePoint database for the project. Then we're going to be creating two tasks in a separate task list. One is going to be an approval task, requiring approval for the project, and the other one going to be task to remind you to assign resources. Now the first task is only created when the requires approval check mark is checked, so you have the conditions on this action. Next, we're going to be creating a team site under the current site for the project. Then we're going to be specifying this group as the contributor for the project, for the project site. And then we're going to be updating the current project item with a link to the new site. We're also going to be creating a new task now within the new project site. And the last step, we're going to be sending an email back to ourselves saying that the site is ready to be used. So let's click on Save. And the actions will start running. In a few seconds, you'll see them completed. Now, the actions continue to run even though the screen has already refreshed. So we can see here that the link to the site is not yet there. If we refresh it now, we'll probably already see the link. And if we go to our Exchange Outlook, we will be able to see that we got an email saying that the site is ready. So let's go to that site. We can go from the email. We can go directly from here. So it's a team site, and it's named according to the name of our project, which is webinar. If we go to the site permissions, you will see that a domain group called webinar users has been created and added as a contributor to our site. If we go to tasks, we will see a new initial task that has been added to this list as well. So let's go back now to the action, to the projects list, and we will also see that there are two tasks that have been created for the project. We can see them in the task list, or we can even see them directly from the project list using a different product of ours that allows you to have this drill down capability. Now let's see how these actions are actually configured. All we need to do is we need to go to the list settings. In the list settings, where you add your columns and change the name of the list, you'll see the action settings. Now, when we go in there, we'll see all of our actions. So some of them we saw earlier when we were creating the project, and there are additional actions that did not appear there. So let's just see how we can configure our actions here. So when we add an action, we're basically filling into 4 different tabs. On the general settings tab, we select the type of action, we enter its name, and so on. On the advanced settings, we specify some additional information on how we want the task the action to execute. In the action settings, we have some action-specific settings, and they differ according to the type of action. And under the conditions, we specify when we want the action to run. So let's go over those tabs in just a bit more detail. So we have all the 15 types of actions here, and we can select one of those. And then we can give it a name so our users will know what it does, and maybe a description as well. And then we specify under which event the action is supposed to run, such as item is added, modified, deleted, so on, or according to timer. Now, the timer-based actions can according to a date in a column. So, for instance, we have a column called end date. We can have an action running 2 days before the end date of the project. Or we can run actions daily, weekly, or monthly at a predefined time. Once we have that configured, we can now go to advanced settings. Here we can, for instance, specify that the action is hidden, and this action will not appear on the user interface. Users will not see it, but it will still execute. Then we can specify when it's executed, always, opt-in, opt-out. We talked about those options before. There's also an option of seeing the action as a column. So these actions need to be started manually, and you do that by clicking on a column that we add to the list, or you can add it to the contact menu and to the ribbons with an icon that you specify and requiring specific permissions from the user to be visible. There are some additional settings here that you can read about in the user guide. The ones that I do want to talk about is impersonation, which means that the action will execute with a higher level of permissions than what the user has. So we can create items maybe in a list that the user does not have access to. And the actions can also be configured to run synchronously, meaning before the actual event. And we can even cancel the actual event if the action errors out. So for instance, we can stop an item from being modified or created. If now we'll skip to conditions, and here we can, first of all, we can have no conditions at all. That's fine. We can have conditions such as title containing words such and such, but we can also have after change conditions. For instance, when status after change equals to completed. And this action will only run when the event was changing the status to completed, when the project was completed. It will not run before, it will not run after. Now let's go to the action settings themselves. The action settings, as I mentioned earlier, they are specific to the action. So this action is update list items. So what we need to specify here is which items we want to update and what updates we want to run. So first of all, we specify site. We can use the current site. We can select any site in the site collection. We can also specify a runtime value. And runtime value built using text and some column values and some functions. So it's basically this value is only known at the time of the execution. For instance, if we're using the ID of the current item as part of the URL of the site, as we used here in our example, each item, when the actions run on it, it will basically apply to a different site because the URL takes into account the ID of the item. And all of the fields here that have the SAS to them can have these generated values. Now, and the same goes for the list. I can specify the current list, I can specify any list of the selected site, or I can give it a runtime value, the same exact way. Now, once we know the list, we can now specify the items. I can specify any condition, such as, for instance, ID equals to ID, which means the current item. That's commonly used. We can also specify multiple items. For instance, I can say, give me all items where the status is completed. And that will update multiple items. And then I give it values to set. So I'm basically creating mappings of field items, the field values, and field names and the values that we want to give to those field names. And again, we can type in. We can use the value picker, and which can use, for instance, even simple arithmetic, and it will also perform validation of the value that typed in. So for instance, if we're trying to set a value to a date time field, it will only allow us to enter something that can be considered a date. Okay, so we've done that. So just to show you that different actions can actually have different types of settings. So for instance, the create group action, which is a manage active action, will actually have a completely different set of settings. So here we will be selecting the main, the OU, and so on. This is how we actually created the domain group. So let's go back to the project list and see some additional details. So first of all, we need now to start our project. So we can obviously edit it from here, change the status to start to in progress, and save. That's not very convenient. A better way would be to just select several items here, or one or several, and just click on the Start button in the ribbon. So let's do that for our new project. And what it's going to do is going to run the action. It's called Start, and it will basically update the item. The same goes for completing the project. Again, choosing one or several, click on Complete, the action in ribbon, and it's now completed. And the other thing that's happening, once we complete it, there's an action that's actually listening to this change, and it's sending us a printout of the details of the project. So we'll get an email with this nice printout. Now, let's see how this actually works. So we'll go to the action settings again in exactly the same way, and we'll see our two ribbon action and the print action. So these are the ribbon actions. You can see that they're set as show as column. If we go into their settings, we will see that they are set to add a ribbon button with this icon. The same goes for the other one. And what it does is basically setting the status to be in progress for the current item. And there's a condition that the current item before that was not started. Now let's look at the send printout, which is a print list items type of action. So first of all, let's look at its condition. So its condition, as we talked about earlier, is status after change is completed. So if I go now and change the project again, it's still completed, but it has not been changed to completed, so the printout will not be sent again. In the action settings, I can see that what we're doing is we're taking the current item and we're using print template to print it and send it to an email account to the user specified in created by field, and we have some text as well in our body and subject. So the last thing I wanted to show you in this presentation is the ability to actually prevent an item from being saved because of an action. So what we're going to do now, we're going to be adding resources to our project. So we are going to try to add a new resource, which is called Test2. Now this user has already been booked for the same exact time period or overlapping time period, and it has been booked for a different project. So what we're going to have this action run before the item is saved, and this action is going to be checking double booking. And what it's going to show us is it's going to raise an error saying that this user has already been assigned to a different project. Let's see how that works. For that, we'll need to go to the resources list, because that's where we're adding, and we'll go to the action settings in exactly the same way. And here we have a single action called check double booking. So let's see how it works. So first of all, if we go to advanced settings, we'll see that this action is set to be synchronous, meaning that it's happening before the item is actually saved. And it's also set to cancel the save on error. Now, if we go to the action settings, we can see that what it's actually doing is it's checking the number of overlapping registration for this resource. Once it has that, it checks that the number equals to 0, which is what we want. We don't want the resource to be already registered anywhere else. If it's not, then we're going to be raising an error. And this is the error message that you saw earlier. So basically, we're raising the error, and then in the advanced settings, we are saying stop the save process from happening because we raised an error. So this is how we can easily control and make sure that the information that we've entered is correct. So basically, just to summarize everything, we are creating a whole bunch of actions that are running just because we entered simple details of the project. We've created a site. We've created a group for the site. We've created permissions. We've created some tasks. And everything is happening behind the scenes for us, basically turning the simple list entry into a whole process. Let's go back to the presentation. So in summary, we saw now how Smart Action Pro makes it very easy to implement complex, sophisticated business logic in SharePoint without any code, without any development, using just the browser, and really in a fraction of time that it would have taken you if you chose a different approach. So thank you for your time, and I will be happy to see you next time.